Hi folks, this is Tom Affolter, and today I'd like to introduce you to Visual Studio. Now Visual Studio is one of the tools that you'll need to complete my courses here at Spokane Community College. Visual Studio has quite a few different capabilities, and we're going to take a look at just a couple of them as far as an introduction goes. But first of all, let's look at the different types of Visual Studio that you have opportunities to pick up. Let me bring open a website here. So this is www.visualstudio.com, or you can also get to this by typing in www.microsoft.com/Visual Studio, and it will allow you to download a free version of Visual Studio. The free version of Visual Studio used to be referred to as the Express version, but Microsoft now has recoined that to be the community version. So there's three versions of Visual Studio available. You have the community version, the Pro version, and the Pro version is probably that version of Visual Studio that most developers are going to want to pick up. And then you have the Enterprise version, and the Enterprise version is the really expensive, beefy version of Visual Studio. In fact, Microsoft has gone to a new pricing scheme as far as Visual Studio goes, very similar to what they've done with Office. And you'll find that Visual Studio Enterprise version is about $250 per month for a developer, whereas the Pro version is, I'm going to say, approximately $25, $30 per month. So let's go ahead and talk about where you would get it if you're a student. If you happen to be a student at a community college or a student here at Spokane Community College, then we are members of the Microsoft Academic Alliance. Any student can download by going to dreamspark.com a version of Visual Studio that is a professional version. The way that Microsoft works it is you get a complete non-crippled version of Visual Studio. The only restriction is you cannot use it for commercial development. Then the example that I'm going to be using for this class will be the Enterprise version, but rest assured you can't tell with what we're going to be doing whether it's the community or the Enterprise version at the level that we're going to be covering within this class. If your school happens to be, by the way, a member of the Upper End Academic Alliance, then students can go to an extended area of dreamspark.com and download the Enterprise version, and as an instructor that's how I've gotten the copy. So you'll need to talk to your school about the availability of the package. So let's take a look at Visual Studio. First thing you want to do is download it and install the package. It's not a hard install, but it does take quite a while to go through. You don't have to put every tool that Visual Studio has built into it, but I would suggest that you use the default install version right now, because you don't know down the road which tools you are or not going to need, unless you have a problem with hard disk space. Again, I would put everything in, which includes not only the Visual Studio package itself, but also includes the developer packages for C#, for Visual Basic, for C++, and for F#, which we're probably not going to interface with. So once you get Visual Studio installed, the first thing you want to do is go back in and make sure you have run the updates on it. Oftentimes what will happen is the version that you get, or the version you get off DreamSpark, isn't the most current version, and the update will take just as long to install as what the original install does. So once you get it out there, you're going to go ahead and run it. I have it pinned to my taskbar down below, so I'm going to go ahead and start the Enterprise version of Visual Studio. And again, the community version will start exactly the same way. Now, when you start up, the first thing that you're going to see is a startup page, and Microsoft populates this from an online feed, and they have a lot of different news in it. They have some featured videos if you'd like to take a look at those videos. It's a nice place to start, but be very, very careful when you go to it, because it goes all the way from the very beginner level all the way to the advanced level, and sometimes they don't tell you what level you're at, or they expect you to be at when they jump you into it, so it's easy to get lost in if you don't know where you're going. So the very first thing we're going to take a look at here on the screen is we see that we have these three different areas. On the left hand side we have an area that's called the toolbox, which is not populated right now. In the center area, again, we have that start page, which we don't really need to have open. And then on the right hand side we have this area that's called the Solution Explorer. Now, for me to explain features to you, and of course we have the menu that exists across the top. For me to explain the features of Visual Studio to you, I really need to start an application. Now there's three different types of common applications, at least at the level that I teach, that we're going to be working with. The first one is a Windows Forms application. And a Windows Forms application basically is what you're looking at right now. It's a program that's written to run under a Windows application or a Windows area. It has the forms that everything sits on, a nice, cool, clean interface. The other type of application that you would run is what's referred to as a console application. And a console application is like a command window application. It has no basic interface. Usually we use console applications to teach beginners how to program, and then later you use console applications to write programs that do certain things at certain times of the day. For example, I have a console application that every 5 days goes out to a website, grabs a document, brings it back in, and parses it into a database. But it is a good area to learn. And then the third type of application that we'll deal with is a web application. And web applications are dynamic applications that Microsoft gives us the ability to write. These are sites that are not typically static sites. When you write a regular HTML page, those are static pages. That means that if you have a website that has 30 static pages on it, and somebody hits you, you see that person hitting your website as 30 different users. There's no differentiation between them. When you deal with dynamic websites, as we're capable of writing in the Microsoft world, then you can deal with what we refer to as state. That is when the server knows that you're available and you now have the ability to share information among different pages on your website. Why is that important? Well, that would be an example of having to have a shopping cart, where you have the ability to go from page to page to page and order items, and it knows who you are and maintains that common shopping cart page. But to start off with, I think right now, just to explain the overall features of Visual Studio, I'm going to go ahead and create a Windows Form application. So I'm going to start by doing a File, New, and over here you'll see where it says Project. I'm going to click on Project. Now, before I go on, I want to explain a little bit about how Microsoft names its projects and what a project in essence is. If you think about a computer program, the old days a program is all-inclusive. A computer program does everything. In fact, we think in terms of Word or Excel or Visual Studio even as being, or games for that matter, as being a computer program. But Microsoft has broken a program down because in the old days you would have one technology you would write a program in. It might have been written in BASIC or it might have been written in C language. But nowadays applications are written in a variety of different technologies. So you might have one computer program that is made up of maybe HTML, and another feature of it made up of C#, and these programs are intended to work together. Or you might, in the case of a game, you might have two different features of a game program. One feature is the interaction on the screen, and the other feature is the game engine behind, and both of these features work together, but they might be written in different technologies. And Microsoft understood that. So what they did is they decided to say an entire application that's written is what's referred to as a solution. So before we go on, let me show you what we're going to do. We're going to test this out and I'm going to explain it. I've got a folder here that I've created on another screen. I'm going to just pull it over here, and it's called Introduction. And it's on my drive C. And notice that it's empty right now. So we're going to use this folder right now to just create this little tiny program that we're going to write just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to move this off the screen right now. Notice again it's empty, and it's called Introduction on drive C. So over here, what I want to do is I'm going to list inside my application. First thing is I'm creating a new project. Now the project wants to know what is the solution that this is going to go in. You'll notice that it's asking for the name up here. That's the name of the project, the location of where it's going to go, and then it's asking for a solution name. Now up here in this area at the top, it wants to know what is it that I'm creating, and it gives me all of these different templates out here that I can create. And of these templates, I have different languages that I can deal with. So I've got the C# language, which is the language that we are going to focus on. Then I have the Visual Basic language, F#, C++, and then I've got a variety of different types of projects that we'll talk about later as the program goes on, not in this course per se. But I'm more interested in learning about Visual C#. So I'm going to open that up, and you'll notice, I've got some of these things open, there's a lot of different types of programs that I can build within C#. And I mentioned before the three that we focus on. The first thing I want to do is click on Windows here because I want to write a Windows app. It's either going to be Windows or it's going to be web-based. And within Windows, you'll see this is where I find my console application. And folks, we're going to be going through this over and over and over as this program goes on. So this is just a quick overview. But I want to write a C# application in Windows, and I want it to be a Windows form application. And for the most part in this course, this is what we're going to be dealing with. So down below here, this is where I tell it that I want to put it in that C:\\introduction folder. That's where it's all going to go. And I want my project over here to be called First Demo. Excuse me, my solution to be called First Demo. And I want my project to be called the proverbial Hello World. Every time you learn a new programming language, you always start off with Hello World. And I can't change things now. So I've got this created. I'm going to go ahead now and notice what's happened here. I'm telling it that the location of my work is going to go into Introduction. The solution name is going to be called First Demo, but the project is going to be called Name. So what's going to end up happening, folks, is inside this introduction folder, it's going to create a solution folder called First Name. And inside that solution folder, I could put a whole bunch of different projects if I want to, but at this point in time, I'm only going to put one project in there, Hello World. So this is going to be a one project solution. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click OK now, and let's watch what happens. So at this moment, what it's doing is it's going to go out there and build all the different features that I need to have my application run. And now I'm going to come across and show you that folder that I had a moment ago over here. And let's take a look at it. And now notice that inside that folder, the introduction folder, I now have that solution name, First Demo, that we had. And if I open up First Demo, there we go. I now have my project, Hello World, and I have this little file here called a solution file. We're going to talk about that solution file as time goes on because it's a nice little shortcut. Basically what that file is, it's a crucial file for your project because it's kind of like the Dewey Decimal System in a library. It's that feature that manages your program for you. If you delete that first demo out, it doesn't know how to manage all those files that it put inside of Hello World. In fact, let's go back in and look at Hello World has in it. Notice that automatically it's created a lot of different features for me. And rather than just talk about these guys right now, we'll come back and look at those in a minute. But let's jump back over and look at our project now. So the first thing that happened is I notice now on my screen I have this toolbox. I have my form window here. I have a Solution Explorer over here on the top right hand corner, and on the bottom right hand corner I have my Properties window. Now this is the default way that Visual Studio opens up. These are all different features of the Visual Studio application. In fact, these would be all small different windows, if you will, of this application. And I can modify Visual Studio to look any different way I want. So this is kind of like my palette area, my work area right here. And my form would be the actual canvas, if you will. And the form I can drop different tools on from my toolbox. And this is what we call rapid application development in the Microsoft world, the drag and drop world. In other programming languages, I would have to write all the code by hand that generates what I can drag and drop in the Microsoft world. And Microsoft does it pretty efficiently. You know, in the old days when you had builders like this, they would throw a lot of extraneous garbage into the builder itself, but Microsoft has done a pretty good job of tailoring it down and putting only those features in. So let's continue on and take a look at what we've got on the screen here. So on the left hand side I have this toolbox, and the toolbox have all of those things that I can put on my form, things like down here I have a text box, and if I grab that text box, I can throw it onto my form, and then I have a text box on my form. And if I look up a little bit higher here, I have a button, and I can throw this button on the form. Now, the focus of this lecture isn't to talk about object-oriented programming or how to write a program around it. We'll save that for the next lecture. But the idea of this is to understand the features that we're looking at within Visual Studio. Now, even though you can't tell right now, I've actually got a little program that's been written. If I hit my Start button up here, this is my Run button. What this button says is compile the program into executable code and then run it on the screen. Now, even though I haven't written any program yet, there's still enough here for it to display a program running on the screen. So watch this. If I hit the Start button, it compiles it, and then I will see the program appear on the screen in just a moment. And there it is. So here's my program running right now. It's totally independent of my Visual Studio. And in fact, let me show you something. I stopped it. How did I stop it? Let me run it again and show you. I simply closed the program out. Or, to stop it, if I wanted to, I could have gone back to Visual Studio while it's running and just hit that little red stop button up here, just like that. Now, before I go on, I want to show you something really cool. Let's take a look at this over here. This is what we were looking at earlier, so let's go back in. This is that project that was created. Now, earlier I didn't have these two folders. When I ran the program, these folders were automatically created. If I go into this bin folder and inside of debug, I'm going to see that I've got that Hello World program that I just wrote. And if I double click on this guy right here, there's my program running. That's the compiled version of my program running right there. That's pretty slick. Now, it's not quite as easy as just simply taking that program and copying it over to a friend's program or to another computer. That other computer has to have the Visual Studio environment on it, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But if they have that Visual Studio environment installed on their system, this is the only program that they need right here. But we'll talk about later how to package and install program up so you can move it to anybody's computer system. But for now, let's close this out. Let's move this back again, go back to where we were, move that off the screen again, and let's look at some more features of the screen. So we talked about the toolbox. These are all the different features that I can add to my program right here. Okay. Things like checkboxes and radio buttons and all those other different aspects that we're going to take a look at through this program. Now, on the right-hand side over here, what we have is our Solution Explorer. Now, the Solution Explorer, if you will, is kind of a subset. If I move my Windows Explorer back over here, you'll see they look somewhat similar, but not really. And the reason is this is an actual file view of what I've got. But this guy over here represents a Visual Studio view of what I have. Okay, so we start off with the name of the solution, first demo, and then underneath that, I have my Hello World project. And if I had different projects, they would be listed in here. But I've just got that one project right now. So I'll go ahead and open that up, and I have an area called Properties, which we're going to take a look at a little bit later. I've got this little file called app.config, and what app.config is if I open it up, and I'm not going to worry about it, we won't cover that in this course, but what it is, it's the configuration aspect of my program. So if I have logins to databases that I want to hide from users and I want to compile with the program, but I want to be able to use that in different areas, I would put that inside here. Or different startup features of my program, I would embed that here. But we're not going to play with that in this course right now. Over here, I have the form. Now that form represents this guy right here. This is the form aspect. In fact, if I've closed my form out and I don't have my form open, I can go to my Solution Explorer and double click, and it will open that form back up for me. So different features of my program that I might have, maybe multiple forms that exist in this program, I could open them up individually over here. In fact, it doesn't even have to be individual. If I wanted to, I'll open up this app.config file again. I can open them up both ways and jump back and forth between them if I wanted to. Notice the tabs over here and how I can do that. And then I can close this guy out right here if I wanted. Okay. Now, so this represents the screen area. This little file down here at the bottom is basically my startup program. And if I double click on it, it's got a bunch of C# code in here that we're going to talk a little bit about later. But the one file down here that's really important at the very bottom is, the one line at the bottom that's important, is this line called application.run. And what it does is it tells it of all the different features that I have over here. I might have 10, 15 different forms on a really big program. Which form is my startup program? Which form is my menu base, my menu type program, if you will? And by default, it's going to default to form 1. But if I wanted to later, I could change this and have it become something different. Or if I decided I wanted to change my form name here. So what I could do is form 1 doesn't have a lot of meaning on it. So what I might want to do is rename my form and call this my hello form. So what I did is I right-clicked on it and I did a rename, or I double-clicked on it. Now, the first thing you're going to notice when I rename it is it wants to know if I want to rename all aspects of Form 1, because Form 1 is used inside the code in different places. Do I want that to propagate across? And the answer is yes, I do. Okay. Now notice what happened. Immediately it changed it over here to hello form. But there's times when it may not do that. And if it doesn't do that, then you may have to go back in there and plug in the name yourself. But again, in this course, we're not going to have to worry about that. We're going to leave this file alone in most cases throughout the entire program. So I'm closing it out, and yes, I want to make the changes to it. Okay. Now, that leads me to another point about Visual Studio, and that is there is no such thing as having to save in Visual Studio. If you do anything in Visual Studio and then you execute any kind of program, it will automatically save for you. For example, if you look up here at this designer line here, you see that little asterisk, and I'm circling on the screen here. That asterisk is telling me right now that Visual Studio has not been saved since the last time some kind of change has been made to the program. That's all that asterisk means. So if I hit the Run button here and I re-execute, what it will do is it will save, compile, and then run. Now watch this when I stop it. Notice now how that asterisk is gone. That means the program has been automatically saved on my behalf for me. Now, some students and some developers don't like that. Some people believe you have to save, period. Well, if you're one of those people that feel like you have to save, then what you can do is reach up here to these buttons here. This guy says save everything. If I have 3 forms and 3 forms have been modified since the last time I ran it, and I hit that save all right here, all the forms will be saved. If I hit this single save button here, okay, the single save button, then what will happen is only the current form that's in view right here, or the current element would be saved. So I could do that as well. So watch this. If I go ahead and I make a change to my form and I drag something around, immediately that asterisk shows up right there. So now if I reach up and I hit the save button, the asterisk goes away. Now another thing to be wary of is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move something around. It knows it needs to be saved, and now I'm going to quit the program. Either way, whether I quit up here, or I quit using this method, or I quit using the top left corner method. Okay. It's going to tell me you haven't saved yet. Do you want to save? So you cannot get away from the program without saving. It's going to always force you to save. But there is one thing to be very wary of, and this is a common thing that students make a mistake on, and that is doing a save as. If you save the current form as something, and it saves it outside of the project, or it saves it and the project's not aware of that feature, then you can't get to that form anymore. You never ever want to do a save as. A save as is very dangerous because you'll lose the connection between your program and the form. It's basically like taking this form that I have over here on the right side, and even though it's still in that same location, your application over here, your Solution Explorer, doesn't know that it's part of the project and you've lost it. Now, is there a way to get it back? Yes, there is. It's not the focus of this lecture right now. I'll put one together on how to save or to find problems in an application. But right now, this is just basically an overview of it. Now, a couple other things that I want to show you about the code, and that is this window down below here. This window below here is my properties window. Now, the properties window gives me the properties of the current selected object on my form. Now, for us to understand that in more detail, we have to understand object-oriented programming, which is going to be another lecture I go through. So for right now, just bear with me. Whatever I select over here, I have the ability right now to do what's called a design time change. So a design time change of this button says the word button 1 exists on it. On any object that exists, if I'm going to talk about the text, so I've got this form selected. Notice over here it tells me the form is selected. I select the button. It tells me that my button is selected, or the text box, that my text box over here is selected. So anytime I select something, we say that that object is in focus. So that object's in focus right here. So over here, anytime we refer to text in an object, on an object, for example, here is an object, a form right here. And on that form is form 1. Okay, or here's a button. On that button is the text button 1. Or here's a text box. In that text box, there is no text right now. It's empty. But if I wanted to refer to the text on a form, or on a button, or in a text box, that's going to be what's called the text property. So if I want to change the text property of that button, okay, I select the button, I come down below here, I find the text property, and I'm going to put on that text property, click me. Now, as soon as I do that, and I click out of it, look what happened up here. It changed it to click me on my form. Okay? Or if I selected the form itself. Okay, so now look, I'm going to click on the form. It's selected. You can see the sizing bars on it. And by the way, I can size this form any way I want. But with that form selected, if I come down to the text property on that form and I change it from form 1, and now notice here the relationship. Form 1 there, form 1 here. And now I put down on here, hello world. And let's capitalize the hello for consistency. And I click outside of it anywhere. Now I have hello world. And now I run that program. I hit the start button and I run it. Okay. Now, nothing's going to happen. I can click that button all day long. I haven't told it to do anything. There's my text box. I can type into it, but it's going nowhere right now. But I do have a little program that's been written. So again, let's review what we just looked at here. On the left-hand side, I have my toolbox. I have my basic form inside my designer area. On the top right-hand side, I have my Solution Explorer, and that is all the aspects of my program. On the bottom right-hand side, so far, I have my properties window. Now, there's going to be more things that we look at on it. There's more than just the properties window down below. There's a lot of other things that we're going to want to explore. I haven't even got into the code side of it yet. But these basic features are very important for us to understand as far as, making this program work and how to execute the program. And then we're going to stop the program and we're going to start it right now. So what I want to do is go ahead and do a file and exit out of the program. Okay, I'm done with Visual Studio. I'm going to start it back up again. Now before I do that, watch this. If I click on my start down here, it's going to start Visual Studio up with no solution in it, nothing loaded. But if I right click on it, it brings up all these past programs that I've been working on, and I could click on First Demo if I wanted to right here. So that's one way if I wanted to bring open First Demo. I could do it like that. Or I could open up Visual Studio just like this, have it load up. And by the way, sometimes Visual Studio for some reason takes a long time to load. I'm not sure what that reason is. So we start at our start page. Now what I can do is I can either come back over here, and on my start page it's going to list out some things I can do. There's my first demo that I was just working on. Or I can do a file, go down to my recent projects and solutions, and there's my first demo there if I wanted to. That's one way to get into it. Or I simply can say I want to open up a project solution, and at that point then I would maneuver around, find the SLN file, and that's what I would open up. Now there's another way to get into it as well. So I'm going to close out Visual Studio entirely. And I'm going to go back to that application that we had that we created before. And remember, that's that SLN file right there that I told you about. If I double click on that SLN file, when you install Visual Studio, SLN files are associated with the Visual Studio application, just like DOC or DOCX files are associated with Word. If you double click on a doc file or a DOCX file, Word will load with that file. Same thing here. If I double click on a solution file, Visual Studio will open up, and that solution file will open up along with it. And then I can go ahead and make changes and execute it as I see fit. So again, I want to reiterate the basic features. We have the toolbox, we have our design window. Over here on the right hand side we have our Solution Explorer, and on the bottom right hand side we have our Properties window. Now, the last thing I want to show you real briefly is the code aspect of it. Okay. Now, if I do a right click on this area, I can say View Code. Now, there's other ways I'm going to show you later to get to the code, but right now it's going to show me the code, and this is the code that exists behind Visual Studio. Now, these are using statements. We'll talk later about what a using statement is and how it benefits us. As it turns out, most of these using statements are not going to be needed in the application. But this is my code behind window. So here's my design window. Here's my code behind window. Okay, design window, code behind. You see how I can jump back and forth. I can also do a right click and say View Code, and it will take me to my code window. And this is the basic startup code that's necessary for my application to run. And notice right here that this is called a class. Every program that we create is going to be a class. That's an object-oriented programming term that we'll understand a little bit more later. So as I jump back and forth here now, it's going to take me to my code window. Now there's another code window that I want you to take a look at. There's code that automatically is being generated for us. Something had to be used to create all this code right here. And if I go over to my basic form on the right hand side within my Solution Explorer and I click down here, you'll notice that right here there's this area called helloform.designer.cs. And what that is the code that Microsoft is automatically generating for me. Now in the old days, back to about Visual Studio 2002, Microsoft combined all the code that it generated for us through the drag and drop, as well as the code that we generate for us ourselves, this stuff over here, they put it in one giant file. And the problem with that is that when they put it in one file, people would accidentally modify the code that was inside of this designer code, and by just changing just a little tiny bit of it, you could make your whole program bomb. So Microsoft decided to break this apart. They wanted the designer code to be separated from the code that we are going to work on and generate. And that's very important for us because it means that we can't dink around with that code and accidentally modify it and screw things up. Let me show you what it looks like. So if I come back over to this code here and I click on it, you notice it brings open. Let me enlarge this just a little bit. This brings open my code window, and even here they hide some of it behind it. See that plus right there? That's where most of the code is. And here's the code that Microsoft generated just from that little bit of code that we had before. Here's the basic code that defines those text boxes and that radio button that we have on the screen, and here is the basic definition for the text box, the button. Here's the definition of the form itself. Okay. And all of this stuff, if I made one mistake on here, watch this. One little mistake. So here's my design. Okay. I'm going to go back to my designer code here. And let's just say I accidentally deleted out that bracket right there. Just accidentally there. And I go back to my hello design. Ooh, it decided that it wasn't going to bomb on me. See that little red line right there? Let's build this and see what happens. And by the way, a build, unlike a start, so when you hit the start button, you start your program, you tell it to build a program, and building is just another way of saying compile it. You compile it and you tell it to run. If I just tell it to build, I'm just telling it that I want it to compile. And down below, there's these windows, and let me see if I can open them up here. There we go. These windows at the bottom will show me the results of my output. So if I want to build, I build a solution, it's telling me it's failing, there's an error in here. It won't let me run my program because there's a bracket missing. I double click on it and it takes me to where it thinks that bracket is missing, and in fact it's correct. One of the best reasons to use Visual Studio is its debugger, and we'll talk about the debugger in another lecture as time goes on, but that was an example of where the debugger helped us. So normally, folks, you want to stay out of this code window right here. There will be a time when we might want to harness it to our advantage later, but for right now I suggest that we do nothing with this file right here. We ignore it entirely, and all we ever do is we look at the window that's our code window right here. So I think that's pretty much all I want to do as far as an introduction goes. We'll come back in a little while and we're going to take a look at some other aspects of programming. We'll start off with the basic object-oriented programming approach, and then we're going to take a look at variables.